So I'll just start. I'm Meredith St. Pierre. I'm the gift officer here at Great River Greening, and I want to thank you for joining us for this Wonder Hour. These are a series of free events that we put on throughout the year that introduce people to topics that are of interest, but also have a small connection to the work we're doing at Great River Greening. So first, I'll start by telling a little bit more about us. So in its simplest form, Great River Greening takes the mad and makes it beautiful. We transform threatened natural areas, those overrun by invasive species, erosion, and suffering in response to changing climate, into healthy, resilient ecosystems. With some of the top ecologists in the region on our team, Great River Greening protects Minnesota's waterways, restores our public parks, sustains native wildlife, and pushes the needle towards a more sustainable model for agriculture. We make and keep Minnesota beautiful. If you've hiked in regional parks or brought your family to a local lake or even cycled along one of our river corridors here in town, you've probably seen our work without even knowing it. We've touched more than 400 parks and lakes across the state. So it's sometimes easiest to understand our work by understanding how we're different. So Great River Greening doesn't participate in advocacy or land acquisition. We have partners doing that important work. Instead, we do the actual restoration work, planting trees, removing invasives that choke out native habitat, reviving shorelines, and finding natural solutions to environmental problems. And we do that alongside thousands of volunteers, including kids and teens. Tonight, we'll be learning about community-supported agriculture, so I thought it would be a good idea to expand on the work Great River Greening is doing to support sustainable agriculture. So in southern Minnesota, this is the major focus of our work. Alongside partners, we're in the 7 Mile Creek watershed outside St. Peter, Minnesota, to give you a landmark. And then also in the Cannon River watershed between Northfield all the way to Red Wing. And soon we'll be expanding into Redwood County in southwest Minnesota. So in these areas, we work with farmers and landowners to install conservation projects from erosion control and cover crops like kernza, a new sustainable grain, to rain gardens to improve water quality. Modern farming methods, a vibrant farm economy, and excellent water quality all depend on one another, and we're working alongside our partners to make the future of farming sustainable. You can learn more about our work on the Great River Greening website. There's also a website for the 7 Mile Creek Partnership, which I'll include later in this presentation, as well as in a follow-up email. So I also wanted to take a moment to talk about the work that Great River Greening is doing or has done near the farms that are with us tonight. So near Fresh Earth Farms outside Afton, we have a number of projects, as well as near the Big River Farms near Marine on St. Croix. These sites are among just more than 400 that Great River Greening has worked on in our 26 years. These sites all had different needs, and our science-led, community-based work addressed the needs and restored each site to be better for future generations. Now I'll turn the program over to our farmers. We have Matt Frank here from Big River Farms and Chris James here from Fresh Earth Farms. I'll let them introduce themselves, but just a reminder, if you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the chat box, and I'll keep track of them so we can ask all the questions at the end of the program. Matt, I'll let you start.
Thanks, Meredith, and thanks for the invite, for inviting me to join you tonight. I'm excited to be here. My name is Matt Frank. I am the market manager at Big River Farms, so I connect our farmers with potential markets, our biggest one being our CSA program. For some background, Big River Farms is a 150-acre certified organic incubator farm. So what that means is that we partner with beginning farmers and provide them with access to land to grow food. We have a year-long hands-on education program that teaches farmers about starting their own farm business, some sustainable agriculture practices, how to gain access to markets and brand themselves and things like that. So that's in high gear right now. A lot of our education happens in the winter, and then there's more kind of hands-on during the growing season as well. But like I said, our biggest market that we provide farmers access to is our cooperative CSA model. So it's a little unique in that a lot of farmers are individuals or families and have their own CSAs and their own CSA members. And we have this cooperative model where all of the farmers who are in our education program and have access to land at Big River Farms can create CSA contracts and can sell their food to us. And then we collect it and aggregate it all from anywhere between 5 to 8 different farmers or farm teams each year, and then distribute that to our CSA members. So it's a way for them to gain that direct market access as they're learning to grow on a larger scale.
All right, now Chris, tell us about Fresh Earth Farms.
All right. Again, thanks for having me. My name is Chris James. I've defined my title as Chief Farming Officer of Fresh Earth Farms. Basically, the guy who does most everything here as far as running the farm, doing the farming, doing customer support, just about every aspect of running this business. We started back in 2002. Our first crop was about 200 feet of garlic. And from there, we've grown to doing somewhere around 8 to 10 acres a year for somewhere around 170 to 180 families. We are a pure CSA farm. What I mean by that is we only do CSA. We don't sell wholesale. We don't sell retail. We don't go to farmers markets. We look at CSA as a business model, which means everything we grow, we divide up by the number of shares we have, and that's what each of our members gets. The only area where that's not the case is when we have an overabundance of some crop, we may end up giving it to our food shelves. We transitioned from kind of a multi-sales model to that model, to the pure CSA model in about 2008. So we've been doing pure CSA for about 13 years now. We do over 150 different crops if you add up all the different varieties: tomatoes, potatoes, beans, etc. I guess that's probably a good overview for now.
Okay.
If anyone has questions, we can cover that later.
Yeah. So, the big question of the night: what is community-supported agriculture?
Well, I could start with that. The way I see community-supported agriculture is what I just mentioned. It's a business model that focuses on locally grown agriculture and food distribution to the local economy. If you look at other food distribution models, it's grown out in California, out in foreign countries, and delivered to the local market, where it's then distributed through large-scale grocery stores to end user eaters. So there's a lot of middlemen between the farmer and the consumer of the vegetables. The community-supported agriculture, you have a direct link between the farmer and the consumer. So in our case, I know probably 60 to 70% of the members of the farm personally. I meet them on a weekly basis, see them on a weekly basis. You can't say that about the people who farm out in California to fill the local grocery stores.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I would add too that it's a great way for people to get direct access to knowing where their food is grown, how it's grown, because oftentimes CSAs are organic, or if not, they're produced with sustainable growing methods. And also just knowing the farmers who grow your food and reducing the amount of miles that your food travels. So it's really a great business model for that direct connection, again, not only to knowing where your food comes from, but knowing how it's grown and who grows it.
There we go. Next question is, how does it work? Matt, this is your snazzy graphic, so I'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, thank you. So as Chris mentioned, it's essentially a business model, right? A CSA is a business model for a farm, but it's a mutually beneficial business model. So on the farmer side, it allows farmers to do a little bit of upfront planning during the winter and spring months as they're figuring out their growing season coming up. And on the member side, you're providing that support upfront in your financial contribution to purchase your share. So there's a few different like payment options that are available that have evolved over the years. I think historically, decades ago, the primary model was that you would pay upfront for your CSA share. And that would provide that financial capital to the farmers to be able to purchase seeds, purchase tools, have a little bit of financial security as they're going into the growing season and knowing that they have that money in the bank. And what the share is a weekly box of food from the farm that is delivered either to your home or to a drop site. Big River Farms has 14 drop sites throughout the Twin Cities, including spots in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We're part of a larger nonprofit that does a lot of food shelf work, and they have a distribution warehouse in New Hope in the northwestern suburbs. So we have a pickup spot there. Like Meredith mentioned, our farm is in Stillwater, or our farm is in Marine on St. Croix, I'm sorry. And so we have a pickup spot at the farm. We have a few pickup spots nearby too in Marine and Stillwater. And then a new partner who's joining us this year in White Bear Lake. So a few convenient options there. Like I said, it's a weekly delivery. And so we pack up boxes of food that's freshly harvested the day before and deliver each Wednesday. Our CSA season is 18 weeks long, starting in mid-June. I believe it's the 16th of June, which is our first delivery this coming season. And then delivering weekly through mid-October, which I believe is Wednesday, October 13th.
It's nice to think about that summer is coming, the fresh local produce. So Chris, is there anything more you would add on to how it works?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add on is that we do things a little bit differently. We have the same model here where we pack boxes and deliver them, but only about 30 to 40% of our customers get it that way. The other 70% of our customers actually come out to the farm and pick out their produce that they take home with them. So they actually can make the selection as to what they take with them. And the reason we can do that is that we're right next to Woodbury, right next to Cottage Grove. So within, 15 minutes of our farm, we have around, 150,000 people that could potentially stop by. So we don't see it so much as we pack boxes and we deliver. We see it more as a farmer's market style of CSA.
That's cool. Good to know. There's two ways to do it.
Yep.
So what makes doing a CSA green? Chris, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, one of the big benefits is the food miles. We're not talking about thousands of miles to get that carrot from California to Minnesota. You're talking about, in our case, 10 miles maybe, or 15 miles. And if you look at other CSAs that sell to the Twin Cities, we're talking like 100 miles away, so certainly not thousands of miles. They are typically organic, but I want to caution people, when I started back 2002, I think every single CSA that I talked to at the time was organic or grew things organically. Today, there are a number of very large scale 1,000+ acre farms that are not organic. They are actually grown with chemicals and do it the old-fashioned style of farming, or I should say the new-fashioned style of farming, not the old-fashioned style. So be careful when you look at CSAs. Make sure if you want organic that they are either certified organic or can qualify themselves for organic. But we also do things that are beyond organic, doing things like cover crop and nitrogen sequestration, crop rotation. So we try to limit our footprint on the earth as we're growing things, and in fact try and make it better than it was when we first started farming. There's less waste because we try to get everything out to members before it spoils. As we were saying, that things are harvested the day of or the day before you get them, so they last a lot longer, so there's a lot less food waste. We're a polyculture approach, which means we grow, as I said, 150 different types of things, as opposed to the big corn or soybean farms you've seen around, where having a monoculture tends to limit the amount of wildlife that's out there surviving on the farm. It's seasonal eating, so we're not trying to grow things in the middle of winter here. We're not trying to grow tomatoes in a big factory with lots of electricity and lights, and it's ethical. We run things sustainably both from an earth standpoint and from a monitoring standpoint. We want to make sure that the farm is sustainable and is around for a long time.
Okay. Matt, would you add anything about what makes Big River Farms a green option?
Yeah, I think Chris covered a majority of it. I would just say too that it really is about for us to focus on not only that direct connection to potential CSA members and creating that relational connection and the connection with the farm, but also the environmental aspects of what we do are really important. So again, like Chris said, we're really focused on organic growing practices, ensuring that we're not using any harmful chemical pesticides. And we have a big focus on water quality. And this year we're really focusing too on regenerating soil health. So we do a lot of practices to aid in that, like cover cropping and crop rotation. And we did, this didn't happen last year, but we worked with a partner in the past. I think that's based out of Stillwater, called the Pollinator Alliance, that had apiaries or beehives on our property too, to increase the beneficial pollinators that help with the crop growth. So there's a lot of things like that we really focus on, is trying to think bigger, more holistically, big picture thinking as far as not only what are we growing, but how it's being grown, and then both the environmental and social benefits of that as well.
Great. So what are the benefits of doing a CSA? What would you say, Matt? Oh, sorry, I caught you mid-drink.
All good, thank you. Yeah, like I said, just that direct connection to healthy, locally grown food, increasing the amount of healthy food maybe that you might eat, exploring new varieties of food that you might not be very familiar with. It seems like oftentimes there's such a variety of food that the CSA models provide, and that farmers who have CSA programs provide, that might not be more commonplace, especially in larger conventional grocers. So it's a good opportunity to potentially explore new types of produce that you might not be familiar with, and experiment with ways to cook and new recipe ideas for those types of food, those types of produce. Supporting a local economy, again, that, keeping your food dollars local in the local economy, and supporting local farmers, which might not always be the case if you're shopping at a larger conventional grocery store or a big box store, where that money is then leaving the community and going to the corporation, as opposed to getting reinvested in the people who are growing the food. And yeah, just being a part of a farm community, really gaining a better understanding of what goes into growing the food, and getting that connection to the farmers, and feeling like a part of that community with the farm as well.
Okay, Chris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I would add, that's not actually adding it, but kind of filling in the details with our particular farm. With having 70% of our farm members come out to the farm and pick up, this meeting like-minded people, sense of community is really comes alive with our style of farming, or style of distribution. So we have certain times of the week where people come out to the farm and pick up the produce, and while they're picking it up, there's other people picking it up. And if somebody, say, gets a kohlrabi that week and they've never had kohlrabi before, they can ask somebody else, hey, what do you do with kohlrabi? And 9 times out of 10, somebody else says, oh, this is what I do with kohlrabi. And somebody else says, oh, my grandma used to do this with it. So it's a nice way for people to learn about the products that they're buying from other people that are actually participating in the same farm.
Great. So those are all great reasons to join a CSA. What are some of the drawbacks?
Well, the upfront cost is a drawback that's been around for a long time, though. As Matt had said, that's kind of going away as farms start to look at other alternatives like payment plans, or deposits in the fall and pay more in the spring. influence if they find later on. But it used to be that everything was paid up front, and now that's kind of, that drawback is kind of being mitigated. The next one, though, is one that people really need to understand, is that the quantities you get won't always be ideal. You might get too much of one thing or too little of something else, or you might want you might be overwhelmed with broccoli for a couple of weeks in the spring and not had enough tomatoes yet because it's not tomato season. So it's not always exactly what you're looking for. The other part of CSA is that you are assuming some of the risk of farming. When you join the farm, you hope that the farm does really well, and if it does fantastic, you get overwhelmed with produce. If it has a really bad year because it got hailed out or hit by a big windstorm or something, you may not get as much as you would have hoped for. So you are sharing that risk, which sounds like a drawback, but from a farming perspective, if we didn't have the way to mitigate this risk across a larger, broad set of pool of people, we could be out if we had one bad year. So this basically keeps farming around for a while. Of course, it's not year-round here in Minnesota. We don't grow in the wintertime. Pickup time is not always convenient. We try to make it convenient. But sometimes you get stuck somewhere and you can't get to your drop site before that drop site closes. Some of that kind of stuff can be mitigated based on the drop site manager. So that's not that big of an issue. And then this last one, what I mean by supermarket perfect is you would be amazed at how much produce gets thrown away that is edible. And the reason it gets thrown away is because it doesn't look perfect. When you go to a supermarket, nobody picks the ugly apple. They only want the best, perfect looking apple. Well, with our farm, at least, we want to make sure you get everything that we grow. So unless it's a second or something that we wouldn't send out normally, you're going to get it. So if it might have a tomato with a spot on it or two, you're going to get it. If you have a carrot that's misshapen and is shaped like an L, well, we're going to send it out to you. It'll taste better than when you get in the supermarket. So why not? You're going to eat it. You're not going to sit look at it on the table. I don't know if Matt has any other drawbacks.
Yeah, I don't think I have any other drawbacks. I would just agree with what Chris said as far as I think the biggest thing to think about is just it being that sense of shared risk, kind of going back to what I was speaking about earlier about it being a mutually beneficial model. In a certain sense too, there's also that shared risk between both sides because there is that financial buy-in from a member perspective. And then there's that risk on the farmer perspective of the unknowns, like Chris mentioned, of natural disasters or pest disease, things like that, unexpectedly might impact the crops throughout the season. But that being said, I think at Big River Farms, we do all we can to provide as much convenience and mitigation to those risks as possible. So we have a fairly robust CSA software management program that we use that again goes back to some of the cost options. So instead of having to pay 100% of the cost up front, there's a few payment plans where you can pay 25% up front and then pay the other 75% over the 18-week period of the CSA. So you don't have to have that financial capital right up front. You don't have to pay it all at once. The drop site convenience, we try and make really convenient. So instead of just having one or two sites, like I mentioned, we have 14 different sites. And one of the financial incentives and conveniences of picking up at our farm in Marina on St. Croix is that then you don't have to pay a delivery fee, which is nice. So there's kind of a base price for our shares and then another $3 per week delivery fee just to cover the costs of driving throughout the cities in our truck and paying for maintenance and gas and those kinds of things. So again, it's just kind of really thinking about it being mutually beneficial both to the farmer and to you as a potential CSA member, and then also that sense of there being some shared risk, but also shared reward in the abundance of delicious, healthy, fresh produce that you gain access to through becoming a CSA member.
Cool. So I guess now we'll talk, what are the share types? I know you each do different ones. So Matt, I'll let you start and talk about the share types for Big River Farms.
Yeah, thanks, Marta.
Or I guess that's what that you can talk about. I'll go to your slide because I have them written down. There we go. Talk about you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 4 total different types of shares that we offer. 2 different vegetable shares. So we have a full share and a half share. The only difference being the number of produce items that's in each one on a weekly basis. So those are both still delivered on a weekly basis throughout the 18-week season. The full share typically has around 8 to 14 different produce items in it per week. And again, that's weighted a little differently throughout the season. So in the spring, it might have a few less just as the growing season is ramping up. And then in the summer and fall, you might have additional items. Every once in a while, we like to throw in some kind of surprise fun items like an extra pint of ground cherries or some unique items like we had some lemongrass last year that we put into a few shares just to surprise folks. The half shares typically have about 5 to 8, 5 to 9 different items. So this picture here actually is one of our half shares from 2019, from a couple of years ago, just to give you an example of what that might look like. And then more recently, within the past few years, we've partnered up with a few different local fruit farmers who grow fruit, also all organic, certified organic. So we have 2 options there, which can be either purchased separately if you're more interested in fruit and not the vegetables, or typically most people who want the fruit also buy a veggie share. So we have those as kind of an add-on option as well. So those are not grown at our farm, but they are grown locally for the most part. Mary Dirtyface Farm is in Menominee, Wisconsin, and they're certified organic and provide fruit shares to us. And those are delivered 10 times throughout the 18-week season, and typically have about 2 to 4 different varieties of fruit in them, consisting of things like currants, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, plums, apples, and pears that she grows on her farm. And the Everett Myers fruit share is the second option, which is a little bit larger, and that typically contains about 4 to 6 different varieties of fruit on a weekly on a delivery basis. Those are delivered 9 times throughout the growing season, throughout that 18 weeks. And that's a combination of fruit that he grows locally at a farm in Stillwater. And then he also sources fruit from the West Coast from organic farmers in California, Oregon, and Washington State. So typically those are fruits that we don't grow here, like a lot of stone fruits that he might source from the West Coast. But again, those are all certified organic. So a few options that we provide for both vegetable shares that our farmers grow and contribute to, and then some fruit as well.
So Kissa, tell us about the share types you have from Fresh Earth Farms.
All right. We have actually an infinite number of share sizes, though we only sell for delivery the family share and couple share. And what I mean by an infinite number is when you pick up here at the farm, you could buy 1 share for 1 person, a single person. You could buy a couple share, that's 2 shares. What we call a couple shares. Family has potentially 3 single shares. You could have 4 single shares, 10 single shares. It's an infinite variety here you can pick up at the farm. So a couple share, we tend to say, feeds 3 to 4 people. Family shares serves 4 to 6 people. Single shares 1 to 2 people. Again, single shares are only sold here on the farm. Those are all vegetable shares. But we also have add-on shares like eggs. We get eggs from an Amish farm out of Wisconsin. We get mushrooms from a local mushroom grower. We grow the flowers ourselves and make the bouquets. We get coffee from a family here in St. Paul who has relatives that live in Honduras and do all the growing and sun drying and all that kind of stuff in Honduras, and ship the beans up here for them to roast and package for our customers and customers. We also do the fruit share from Everett Myers. We've been doing it with Everett since about 2004, probably one of his first CSAs that I worked with them. We also sell plants for people who want to grow them. We have a winter share, which is basically storage things like winter squash, onions, shallots, garlic, and what else? Something else. Um, we have a 19-week season, starts in the middle of June, goes to the end of October. The eggs are every other week. The mushrooms are once a month. Flowers are about 10 weeks plus fall preparations. Coffees once a month. Fruits every other month. I guess that's about it.
Okay. Now we'll jump back in time in the presentation. 2. What are questions people should ask if their prospective CSA farm partner as they're thinking about joining one?
Well, I remember when I sent you this presentation, we had 2 sets of slides for what you should ask a prospective farmer. And I actually like the second one better because this one kind of is the kinds of questions people always ask, which is how long have you been in operation? Where are your pickup locations? What are the share sizes and how does it cost? And what I found is whenever somebody asks me those 4 questions, the likelihood of them joining our farm is very minimal because what they're doing is they have a spreadsheet and they're taking the size and divided by the number of weeks divided by the number of the cost. It's the cost per week, and then decide which is the lowest cost per week or the closest drop location. And certainly with the closest drop location, what you end up with is the large scale farms that have 60 drop sites and not the small family farms that give you better service and support. So those are the kind of questions that I think you have to ask or know, but don't base your decision on those questions. Instead, you should ask things like, why are you a farmer? What got you into this? Why are you selling as a CSA? Do you do any other kinds of channels? Do you sell wholesale? Do you sell to restaurants? Am I competing for your time and your best produce with the restaurants down the street? Or are you giving me everything that you grow? How do you grow it? Do you do it organically? Do you use chemicals? When do you use chemicals? Why do you use chemicals? Why can't you just do it all organically? So there's a lot of questions about how they run their business that I think are more important in the long run than where's the drop location and what size share do they have. So if you really want to make a decision on what farm to join, it takes a little bit more work than just putting a spreadsheet together and calculating the per week cost. Now, a lot of the questions can be answered by looking at the website, so you don't have to actually ask the farmer and get them on the phone, but if you can, it's even better.
Yeah, I would add in too that I think there's so many options now for getting healthy food, especially here in the Twin Cities and nearby Western Wisconsin. I think both of our states have really robust local food systems and things in place that really support those local food systems. And so CSA farms and CSA options have really expanded and grown over the past 10 years. In the past, they've been around for decades, but have really kind of come back to the forefront and expanded and grown the past 5-10 years. So I think a good question for potential CSA members to ask now as well is what makes your CSA or your farm unique within kind of the CSA world. And for Big River Farms, I would say oftentimes we see feedback from our members that one of the main reasons they decide to join our farm is because they really align with our mission and our values. Like I said, we're an incubator farm and we're a cooperative aggregated CSA model. And we really support and work directly with farmers who have been disenfranchised or oppressed within agriculture systems within the United States. So a lot of our farmers are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, female farmers, and farmers who are new Americans or who are immigrants and refugees. To gain that access to farm education, to sustainable agriculture, to land to grow on, which is a really huge barrier to beginning farmers, especially farmers of color. So that's kind of one of the unique things that sets our farm apart a little bit, in that we hear from members who return season after season is they really appreciate and want to support that aspect of our farm as well. And then the other thing that I would add too is just that the CSA software program that I mentioned earlier allows us to add some additional benefits for potential CSA members. So historically, CSAs primarily were kind of the one box model or the one share model, where every CSA member who was a part of that program would receive the same items or the same produce in their box each week, just based on what was harvested in the field. And with this new software program that we started using last year, it provides a little bit more customer flexibility as far as preferences. So at the beginning of the season, you can identify from 60 plus produce items that our farmers grow. You can rate them from 1 to 5 stars based on if you really like certain items and you really dislike certain items. And then throughout the season, each week, you'll receive an email from me that lays out what's available that week for harvest for our CSAs. And there's an algorithm built into the software that uses all of your 50, 60 plus preferences for different food items, for different produce items. And then it creates a custom box for you based on your specific preferences. And then you can also go in each week and swap out items if we have extra inventory. So say you really want to can something and we have a whole bunch of tomatoes that week. You might be getting like a pound or 2 of tomatoes in your CSA share. But if we have a bunch of extras, you could also choose to pay a little bit extra and get some extra tomatoes in your box that week. And then there's also the ability to swap out items. So if your preferences and the customizing with the algorithm sends you a box and there's a few things in it that you still don't want or would rather swap out, you can do that as well. So say there was, squash and you prefer tomatoes, you could do that swapping out in advance too. So it's really allowed some more flexibility and customization on the member side, which has been really nice.
So what are advice you'd have, and this question is a good one, but what I'm thinking of is when I was talking to both of you in advance of this event, tonight, is that you should be an adventurous eater. So beyond that, what are other things as people think of what it would be advice if you're going to become a CSA member?
Well, I can give you my suggestions. I remember when I was writing this presentation, this was a presentation from about 5 or 6 years ago. I just sent an email to my customers and said, what advice would you give to people? And these are the kinds of things they said is, get a good vegetable cookbook. Well, I don't know if that's how you're supposed to spell vegetable, is that right? Get a good vegetable cookbook. Get involved as much as possible. They really like the fact that they can come out to the farm and talk to the farmer on a weekly basis. They can talk to members of the farm and get their input on ideas and uses and so on. This third one, I was kind of surprised when they said this, but they liked that we only had one sales channel. That's the CSA. They liked the fact that they didn't have to compete for my time or our vegetables with the local restaurants and grocery stores. They said make sure you pick a good convenient location for pickup because you're going to be doing this for the next 19 weeks. It's not like a one and done kind of thing. So you want to make sure you're not driving halfway across the city to pick up your produce. So we have had people that have done that. Be prepared to start a new weekly produce habit. One of the things that's in my mind kind of frustrating is when I hear somebody call up or send an email saying, yeah, I went to the doctor and they said I need to eat more vegetables, so I'm going to join a CSA. Well, joining the CSA is not going to make you eat more vegetables. It's going to make you create more compost maybe, but if you don't change your eating habits and learn to use vegetables and cook vegetables, eat them raw, whatever is appropriate use, you're not going to make changes to your eating habits. You're still going to stop on the way home, even though you have a box of produce in your fridge. So you really need to make sure you're going to take ownership of this changing approach to eating. Like you said before, be adventurous eater. You're going to get new things you haven't had before. Be willing to try things. I remember one person said, if you get something you don't know what it is, stir fry it. If you still don't like the taste, put cheese on it. And it seems to work for anything. So, try things. Don't have to follow a cookbook or a recipe. Just cooking it with some other things like garlic and onions, it's going to taste fantastic because it's fresh and local and it's just very flavorful things. And the last one is find a farm that offers what you like to eat. Because I remember one person called up one time and said, yeah, can I choose what I take with me? And I said, well, if you pick up at the farm, you can. Why do you need that? And she said, well, I'm allergic to anything that's a salacious crop. So that's anything like potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And if you think about summer crops, that's like 30% of the summer crops. So I said to him, why are you joining the CSA? It didn't make any sense to me. Go to the farmer's market. Go somewhere else to find your local vegetables. The CSA really is for somebody that doesn't have those kind of eating challenges. Now, if you just don't like tomatoes, there's ways to get around that, especially with our farm, with the on-farm pickup. But if you're that concerned about every single thing you eat, I think you have to find a different way to get your local vegetables. With that, I'll let Matt fill in his ideas.
Matt, is there anything you'd like?
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, Meredith.
No, I was going to say, go ahead and add on, Matt.
Yeah, no, I think I was just going to say the things that really stand out to me that Chris already mentioned and Meredith mentioned as well is just that sense of wanting to be both an adventurous eater and then maybe up your cooking skills or explore new recipes and new ways to cook food. I love what you said, Chris, about the stir fry option. I think that's a great tip that I've heard as well. And I would also add in veggie and egg hashes is one of my go-tos. I feel like oftentimes there's a lot of great vegetables that you can dice up and stir fry in a skillet and get some eggs going and do a little veggie breakfast hash. That's often a great way to make use of a lot of the veggies from your CSA share.
One other thing that I like to add is I remember talking to some people in the past, and they said, give yourself 2 years to try it. Because the first year, you're going to be struggling with what to do with the different produce that you get. But once you kind of see how the season goes, what the early season vegetables are, what the late season vegetables are, what vegetables come at the same time, you start to generate a list of your go-to recipes. And by the second year, kind of just, when you get the tomatillos, you go, oh yeah, let's get the salsa verde recipe out, and you make salsa verde. When you get the, overabundance of carrots, well, there was that one carrot soup we made last year, that was pretty tasty, so let's do that again. So, the first year can be a struggle for some people that aren't real big vegetable eaters, but by the time you get to the second year and see how it's gone, and you've gone through a year, then you are much more successful in using it.
Great. So
yeah, I would also add in too that it's a great way to not only be more of an adventurous eater and to cook more and to think more about new recipe ideas, but also a really great way to, if you're not already into it, to get into thinking about preserving food as well. There may be occasions where you get a lot of one item per week that you can't use all at once. And it's a great opportunity to figure out how to do some food preservation and canning and saving things in the fridge or the freezer for the fall or the winter when we might not have as ready access to fresh produce in Minnesota. So a good way to get into that, and also to just continue to have access to that healthy local food in the winter months as well.
Great. So now we'll open it up to questions. So if you have one, go ahead and put it down in the chat. But I do have a couple questions of my own, and also some that came from Chris's presentation he shared. He mentioned there were more questions to ask. So I'll ask you both, what is your favorite item to grow at the farm?
For me, it's garlic, and for a number of reasons. Reason one is that it's planted in the fall where everything else is planted in the summer. So when you're sick of harvesting, all of a sudden you get to go back to planting, which is nice. Second, it stores really well, so you don't have to get it out that week. You can store it and sell it or deliver it over a number of weeks. And third, it's just a very useful ingredient in a lot of different dishes.
That's great. What about you, Matt?
I have kind of a cop-out answer, but I love it all. I'm like I mentioned before, I'm the market manager, and so I'm not a farmer myself. I do have experience growing food, but in my current role, I'm not doing that. And so, but I do go each week and walk the fields. We have 50 acres that are in production, and talk one-on-one with our farmers to get a sense of what might be ready for harvest for the following week for our CSA share. So that's always really enjoyable, getting to see the variety and the colors of all the produce that's out in the field. When you mentioned garlic, Chris, I was thinking along similar lines as far as root crops and storage crops and bulb crops that are really versatile and that are a lot of which are planted in the fall and can be harvested later in the season, or like you said, garlic that's planted in the fall and comes back the next year. Garlic scapes is something that I always get really excited about in the early spring, which are kind of the tendrils at the top of the stalk above ground where the garlic is growing that can be snapped off and then used to cook or stir fry with or turn into a pesto. I think that's one of my favorite things to see at the beginning of the season.
Great. So what would be the most challenging crop, the thing that maybe keeps you up at night or gives a little extra elbow grease to make it happen?
I can start and say that last season we had a huge infestation of potato beetles. So that was our big headache, was trying to figure out how to mitigate that.
Chris, what about you? What's your challenge?
I have to say I did not hear any of what you said. I don't know if it's my internet or your internet. So what was the question?
Well, what is the most challenging crop? What's the one that gives you the most struggle?
As of late, I would say tomatoes. They seem to be very fragile. They're hard to keep from getting diseases. I think part of the issue is that we grow lots of different heirloom tomatoes, so they're not necessarily that disease tolerant. So it could be some of the fact that what we choose to grow. But in the past, I mean, we've had trouble with broccoli. And I just remember when I first started, I was at a class, and the farmer that was giving the class said, if I never had to grow another stalk of broccoli, I'd die a happy man. And I had no idea what he was talking about, but after a few years of trying to grow broccoli and really hot spring years, I understand what he's talking about now.
So this is one that you mentioned, garlic, scapes, and some other things. So, and you, Chris, mentioned you grow tomatillos. So like, what would be something that, like, I'm like a Minnesota kid, I'm not like what I think I see in the grocery store. Like, what is the thing that would surprise me when it, like, the crop that'll give people the most, like, oh wow, you can grow that in Minnesota, that might come in a box?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head that people said, well, you can grow that in Minnesota. But I mean, as you said, garlic scapes is one of the things that if you haven't been a part of the CSA, you typically don't have any idea what they are. I guess they're getting more prevalent in farmers markets these days, but I remember back in 2003 or 4 when I was selling them at the Hastings Farmers Market, nobody knew any idea what they were. Other than that, I think, we just grow standard vegetables, different varieties of them. Something with tomatoes, something on the screen here, but they're just the things that most people know what to do.
Okay. Matt, is there any surprises that might come out of Big River Farms?
The thing that came to my head immediately was when you said what might surprise the Minnesota palate is hot Thai chili peppers is something that our farmers grow. And like I mentioned before, we work with a lot of farmers who are immigrants and refugees. And so there's a lot of foods that might not be familiar to our palates, but are fairly well known now, like things I mentioned before, like lemongrass. There's a lot of like culturally specific foods that our farmers grow that they have experience growing back from the countries that they came from and immigrated from. So things like Thai eggplant, whereas we might be more familiar with Italian eggplant. Thai basil instead of Genovese basil, things like that.
Great.
One other thing I was going to add to that particular discussion is, I remember one time we had this couple that bought the families here because they were vegetarians, and they came out to the farm to pick up their produce, and they walked right past the tomatoes without stopping and without grabbing any tomatoes. And at that time, I think we were giving out, they would have been able to get like 4.5 pounds of tomatoes if they chose to take them. And so I stopped and said, why aren't you taking any tomatoes? And they said, well, we just don't like tomatoes. We have restaurants take them off our sandwiches, keep them out of our salads. We just do not like tomatoes. I said, well, you haven't tried heirloom tomatoes before, have you? And I said, well, we just don't like tomatoes. She said, at least take at least 3 pounds of these tomatoes. You get 4.5 pounds, at least take 3. And so they said, okay, fine. At least I filled them up with a bunch of different types of tomatoes. They took them home. The next week they come back. I said, how do you like the tomatoes? They said, we loved them. We ate all that night, all 3 pounds that night. So you have to realize that when you look at vegetables, they're not what you get in stores. The taste of vegetables in stores is far different than you get from a CSA farm, especially because, as one of the slides said before, we grow things based on taste, not based on appearance, not based on transportability, not based on storability, but based on how they taste. And if they taste great, then we'll grow them. If they taste, even if they don't store very well, even if they have lower yield. But if they don't taste great and have fantastic yields, we're not going to grow them. It doesn't matter because nobody's going to eat them. So you really have to realize that the vegetables you're going to get are not the vegetables you grow up with necessarily, unless you grow up with your own garden or part of the CSA. Yeah.
Great. Do you guys have any other final thoughts before we sign off? We have a slide here where I will email everyone all of the links here, but these are places where you could find a CSA on top of the 2 from the farms that shared tonight, as well as the Great River Greening, our 7 Mile Creek partnership. So there's a lot of resources here around CSAs and finding one for you. Do you guys have anything you'd like to add for the night?
Well, as one of our members said when I asked them for advice, they said, just do it. Just go out and try it. The worst thing that can happen is, as another person said, I've never eaten so well and lost so much weight in my whole life. So, if you like vegetables or you want to try and eat better, just do it.
Sounds good. Matt, any final thoughts?
Yeah, and I was just going to reiterate what Chris had touched on a bit before too, as far as it being a really great opportunity to not only get access to really fresh, delicious, nutritious local food, but also to kind of eat more with the seasons and to get more in touch with the seasonality of our food as well. And again, like Chris just mentioned, the flavor, the really deep flavors of locally grown food and unique varieties that you might not find at the conventional grocery store that are really grown for those really delicious flavors.
Great, thank you. So it's nice to think about where we're headed. Spring, summer crops, fresh tomatoes. It's nice to think about. Even it's a warm winter day, but it's nice to think about the seasons that are coming. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll eat well this comes some summer. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone.